All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Strope. I'm the Chief Strategy and Planning Officer here with IPS. Thank you so much for joining us this evening as we are going to walk through Transportation Town Hall to explicitly have a conversation about the 21-22 initiative around IPS walk zones. And so a quick housekeeping item before we dive in, this session is being translated in real time for our Spanish speaking families. To access the Spanish version, please click the interpretation button, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and choose Spanish. In addition, the Spanish version of this slide deck will also be put in the chat window as well. So you can find that there. All right, so the goals for this evening is we will first start with understanding the current state of IPS transportation operations. So Superintendent Alicia Johnson will walk us through that. We will then dive explicitly into walk zone execution as a 21-22 initiative, and then we will walk through some additional community engagement and support items that we are thinking a lot about as an organization. We will also walk through some key questions and answers. We've had a number of great questions come through a feedback form that has been online on our website. We will also ask that you put questions in the Q&A, which we will be collecting and trending up, and I will ask some of those questions as well. Also, it is important to note that from a walk zone perspective, we have had the walk zone policy, which has been in effect since 1998, and so as we think about making this potential transition, just note that we have had the policy which has been there for a little while, and we are kind of thinking about what it looks like to transition and execute into that policy. And want to first start with, from a strategic plan perspective, we have a 2025 IPS strategic plan that outlines our core values as an organization, as well as our priorities. And so as we work through decision-making around any initiative in the organization, we want to make sure they are aligned to these 5 values. That is students first, racial equity, continuous improvement, integrity, and community. And then as we think about our 4 priorities heading into 2025, one of them is related to operate and fund strategically, and that is to strengthen the efficacy and equity of central office support services and resource allocations. And so we are thinking a lot about what are the cost reduction and revenue generation strategies in key departments that can increase our financial sustainability over time, and in particular, invest our resources in a strategic way that directly supports our instructional priorities. And so now I will turn it over to Superintendent Johnson to walk through some historical and current context of IPS transportation.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for everyone who has joined us this evening and taking time out of your schedule to learn more. We appreciate that. If you've been paying attention over the last several weeks, you know that we've been spending a lot of time talking about budget, and there's been lots of conversations about funding in the education space overall over the last several weeks. So a couple of things I wanted to be sure to share, again, as context for this conversation and around the recommendation we're making. First, it is no surprise to anyone the impact that COVID had on our specific school district and really school districts across the country. Specifically in IPS, we've faced a $15 million deficit for this current school year, and we anticipate an $18 million deficit heading into the 21-22 school year. Obviously, we're very thankful and grateful that there are federal stimulus dollars that many folks have heard about that are coming in that will help us in our recovery efforts. But those are one-time dollars that are specifically to address what we've experienced as a result of COVID, and certainly won't help us ensure that we're meeting the long-term, sort of longer-term gaps that we're facing when it looks and comes to our finances. So what you see on this slide are the different ways that we could address being stable over the long term. And what we are hoping to do and working to do is to ensure that we as a district are staying at that purple line. So you'll notice that's a line that just sort of goes straight across and is holding relatively steady. Then you'll notice a green line and an orange line, and those are lines that you'll notice are going down a hill and would really signify where we would no longer have a positive budget outlook. So we have to be sure that we are working to stay at that purple line for the district's long-term health and viability to serve our kids and families well, which means we have to make some strategic decisions, and we have to make those decisions now to ensure that we can keep that straight line going into the future. And the reality of it is strategic doesn't mean easy, and it doesn't mean that those things will come without changes and transitions. And so we know the recommendations we're making around transportation will come with some transition and some changes, as will be the case with the other recommendations that we make. But the bottom line is what we are committed to doing for our families, for our broader community, is communicating as we are thinking through and making these recommendations, making sure we're explaining the why behind them, and ultimately being sure that we're being good stewards of the resources that we have, so that we can keep any sorts of reductions as far away from the classroom experience and from teaching and learning as possible. So that has been the priority that I've set forth and that our team has set forth. And as we think about how we manage our budget, to do so in a way that hopefully is not impacting our teaching and learning environments and the experience our kids have in their classroom every day. So we can drill in a little bit more on transportation. It's a couple of things that the question is, well, why transportation? Why is that the place you're focusing? And actually, we've been looking at transportation for some time, because we know that our spend in transportation is actually quite higher than our neighboring districts and even other similarly sized districts across the country. And there are a few reasons for that. One, we have a high choice model. So students who choose a particular school based on that model, if they live on the east side and the school's on the west side, we still commit to transporting that student so they can get to school each day. We also have a pretty high degree of school autonomy, where schools in some cases have chosen the length of their day and the time and end and start time of the school day, which then can drive up transportation costs. Over time, we've baked in, quite frankly, some of the exceptions to our policies that have just gotten built into the way that we do transportation. Some of that is what we're adjusting for with this walk zone transition. And then obviously our district is pretty broad, east to west and north to south. We cover a lot of ground, and there's a cost to doing that as well. So those are just a few of the reasons why, when we look at our transportation costs, we often find that we are significantly higher than other districts. Next slide. So what have we done about that? Knowing that information, there have been a few things we've tried over the past several years and that we've put into place to continue to reduce those costs. We've leased fuel efficient buses for savings with gas costs. We've changed the bell structure in schools so that we can, it's called pairing, but we can match up or pair school bus routes in a more efficient way. We've shifted and transitioned some of our after school and extracurricular busing to be more efficient. And then last year we partnered with a new transportation partner for student for some savings in terms of our transportation costs with our partner in providing those services to us. So I wanted to be sure as we go into this conversation about this shift, that the context of how we found ourselves at this point and what we've done up to now was clear as we talk about the transition that we are recommending around walk zones. So I will turn it over to Zach Mulholland, who serves as our Executive Director of Operations. Zach?
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. And before I review the 21-22 recommendations, I'll just remind everyone, as Andrew indicated at the start of our meeting, that if you have any questions during the presentation, please type those into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your team, or your screen rather, I'm sorry. We have a team working behind the scenes that will gather and organize those, so we'll try to answer those at the end of the presentation. So on your screen, you'll see some of the efforts and initiatives we're looking at with respect to trying to identify opportunities to reduce some of our expenditures with respect to transportation services, and try to, again, keep some of those hard budget decisions out of the classrooms. Tonight, specifically, we'll talk about that middle initiative, which is our work and analysis with respect to our walk zones. But we've also have two other significant initiatives that are driving some of our planning and potential savings. And one of those is with respect to the continuation and extension of our partnership with Indigo. Again, this is would only be impact our high school students. And so looking at opportunities to find ways to partner and reduce duplication of services between Indianapolis Public Schools and our Indigo partners. And then also doing some work with route optimization. So looking for opportunities to redesign routes, looking for opportunities to better pair our buses across our bell structure, and then looking at the location and number of our bus stops to look for opportunities to reduce ride time and have greater routing efficiency. And so tonight we'll look at specifically the walk zone execution policy. And you'll notice for across all three of these, the only one that formally requires board action is the recommendations and shift with respect to Indigo. Both our walk zones and the route optimization don't require formal board action, but are part of our efforts and planning with respect to the 21-22 school year. So looking at our walk zones, as Andrew indicated at the start of our meeting, IPS has had longstanding board policy dating back to the 1990s that outlined and established the criteria by which IPS would provide transportation services to enrolled students. That policy states that transportation will be provided to students who live outside of a prescribed walk boundary for their schools. And you'll see that those walk boundaries indicated on your screen. And so for elementary schools, those are for students who live beyond 1 mile, more than 1 mile from their assigned school. For middle school students who live beyond 1.25 miles for their assigned school, and high school students who live more than 1.5 miles from their assigned school. In addition, any student for whom the superintendent determines transportation to be necessary due to a verified health or safety factor. And so one thing I want to note on this slide is that for a number of our schools that are K-8 schools, in practice, we treat those students, all students at a K-8, as if they were attending an elementary school. So even though you may have a 7th or 8th grader attending a K-8 school, in practice, functionally, we treat that as a elementary school. And so the walk boundary for a K-8 school is at that 1 mile boundary. Last year, we began the process of evaluating both our walk zone policy and opportunities to identify areas where we could support walk zone implementation at selected schools. And so one of the challenges we faced as a district and as a transportation team last year was managing the impact of COVID-19 with respect to trying to minimize the risk of students for transmission and trying to enforce and enhance transportation services through the enforcement of physical distancing. And so last year, as we were planning throughout the spring and into the summer for the current school year, the 2021 school year, we knew we needed to reduce some of our yellow bus daily ridership to help facilitate that social distancing on our buses and reduce the risk of transmission between students. So we, both on our buses, employed a number of strategies to try to minimize the risk through ventilation and provision of PPE to our drivers and monitors. We provided hand sanitizer, had enforced the wearing of masks for all of our students. And the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, also provided guideline that recommended that school districts attempt to limit bus ridership onto a 1 student per seat standard. And so that created a number of logistical challenges as we tried to make sure that we were continuing to provide transportation services, but trying to align that service to those recommendations. And so had a number of strategies to try to align to those recommendations and reduce daily ridership. And so we had a number of families who opted into a virtual learning environment for the current school year. We had a number of families who opted out of IPS transportation service. And then even across those two efforts, we knew there were some additional students that we needed to reduce off of our yellow buses to try to facilitate safe daily transportation and align to CDC guidelines. And so we identified 13 schools for the current school year that had a large number of students that were living within the prescribed walk boundaries of their schools, but were continuing to receive yellow bus transportation services. So last year we engaged those schools and did some planning and supports around beginning to transition and implement align our practices of walk zone policies at those particular schools. And so did some targeted communications and outreach to impacted families and some supports and communication and outreach to those schools to support that transition. And as part of that effort, identified strategic locations where we could deploy crossing guards to help facilitate and support the walk zones at that school. And so you'll see there are about 2,200 students last year for the current school year that were shifted from yellow bus and into those walk zones. And I would note here just that what, as we indicated, the walk zone policies are decades old, going back to the 1990s. And one of the causes of the current situation where we have many students that live within those walk boundaries but are continuing to receive yellow bus service was a decrease in external budget allocations and support for crossing guards. And so as that those dollars that were allocated to us previously were eliminated and reduced, we saw a slow elimination and reduction in the number of crossing guards to the point where for the 18-19 school year and the 19-20 school year, we no longer supported and deployed crossing guards. And so we, partially as a result of the efforts last year with respect to COVID, and as a continuation of our efforts to try to reduce some of our transportation costs, began to again look at opportunities to deploy those crossing guards and reduce the number of hazard buses that were assigned to students. So building on that effort last year with respect to those 13 schools that we identified and began to transition into the walk zones through crossing guard support, we're going to build on that and continue to execute at all of our schools the walk boundaries as prescribed in board policy. And so we're expecting an additional 2,000 students to be shifted from yellow bus service and into walk designation for the 21-22 school year. So in total, we're estimating anywhere between 5,500 and 7,000 IPS students will be designated as walkers for the 21-22 school year. And we're continuing to work both internally with our IPS transportation team and our transportation service provider to identify the location and number of crossing guards that will be deployed in the 21-22 school year to support implementation of those walk boundaries. In addition to that, the school level supports and crossing guard investments that we'll continue to build upon in the 21-22 school year will continue to maintain a walk zone exemption request process. And so both through the schools and on the IPS homepage, the students and family tab, and then the transportation webpage, there's lots of information about our crossing guard location and deployments, the walks boundaries for schools, information with respect to questions about walk designations, and also links in both English and Spanish to that walk zone exemption request process. And so this is an opportunity to make sure that a family that has a specific question or concern about that transition or about that designation can ask for a individualized review of that. And so we certainly want to make sure that that no students were shifted from yellow buses incorrectly. So we want to make sure that the data and information that we have is accurate and up to date in making those decisions. And if there are specific and unique circumstances related to the health or other factors related to the student that we need to take into consideration, we want to review those on a case-by-case basis and where necessary and appropriate, provide yellow bus transportation for those students. And I would also note that any student for whom transportation service is either required by law or as part of a special education IEP 504 plan, those students will continue to receive yellow bus transportation services and would not be impacted by these recommendations. Superintendent Johnson, I believe I'll turn things back over to you at this point.
Yep, thanks, Zach. And thanks for going through those logistics. We know we covered a lot of nuts and bolts as he was talking, but again, just wanted to make sure we're communicating sort of all the thinking and work that's been happening as we think about this transition, that you have all that information. But we don't want to get lost in just the nuts and bolts and logistics of this. We know that, again, for shifts and changes that are happening, it's really important that we have supports in place, both as a district and as a school, for our families who are making this transition for the first time. So we know for some families, they've been, walking for quite some time, and that's been a regular routine in the way that their family has operated. But for some others of our families, this will be new. So we want to make sure that we are providing those supports and that you feel like you have what you need as we're making this transition. So to that point, I'd like to invite Ashley Scott. She's our Director of Family and Community Engagement to talk about some of those efforts that are underway.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. As the Family and Community Engagement Team, or FACE team, we are dedicated to cultivating and maintaining healthy working relationships with parents, families, community members, alumni, and faith-based organizations. As mentioned, for the past several weeks, we have been in contact with families about the expansion of the IPS walk zones, specifically with the goal of ensuring everyone understands the changes coming for the upcoming school year. We also desire to gather feedback about the plan. So as been shared already, please share your feedback and also utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout tonight's town hall. So this interaction with our families, along with the comments provided through the walk zone feedback form, allows us to be both strategic and intentional in the projects that we're working on in tandem with the expansion of the walk zones. For example, we're incorporating Safe Route to School's walking school bus and other special programs as we implement these transportation changes. Now, I know some of you, some of our schools already use the walking school bus program, but if you're unfamiliar with the program, it's a predetermined route where families located along that route are instructed to meet up with other students and chaperones at a designated time and place. They then walk as a group and meet up with other groups that have been traveling along the same route until they get to school. So we're going to be working with schools, family members, community partners to train them on how to implement this program safely and successfully in the upcoming school year. We will also work with school team members to help organize car rider and carpool signups, particularly at back to school and then throughout the year. And we're also actively creating literature and guidance around carpooling and how to be safe when walking to school, as well as detailed instructions on how to facilitate the walking school bus program as mentioned. Finally, well, not finally, but I'll say we've also discussed utilizing yard signage for community members and family members to remind motorists to drive smart when they're in a school walk zone area, because we do know that safety and walking in areas where there are some challenging environments are of the utmost concern to parents and families. And then finally, we've been working with community partners on other creative ways to support parents and students through these changes. We're looking forward to receiving additional feedback from our community partners on the ideas that they have to support communities as we make this transition for the upcoming year. So again, I just want to reiterate, we know these are your babies and they're our babies too, and we care very deeply about their safety. As we've surveyed parents and community members, safety has been at the top of the feedback list as we kind of are surveying those results. And so we want to continue to address that as often as and successfully. So please continue to share your thoughts and any advice that you feel we should take into consideration as we're developing these best practices and guidance for our schools and our families as we implement these changes. It's our goal to provide you even more details on our related supports in the coming months. Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap up the presentation.
Great, thank you, Ashley and team. And so before we get to Q&A, I'm going to just go over a few quick slides on timeline, next steps, and just reiterate some of the support elements that Ashley just described. So from a timeline perspective, back in March, we presented recommendations to the board around 22 transportation initiatives. And then that kind of kicked off a number of conversations that we are having, including tonight, through the month of April, to provide more detailed information to schools and impacted families. We will be coming back to the board at the end of April, on that Thursday, April 29th, to ask for formal action from the IPS board for transportation recommendations, in particular Indigo. And then after April 29th, really we'll start focusing on implementation. And so May, June, July into August, a number of things that Zach and Ashley mentioned will be our focus to ensure that that this is implemented with fidelity and of course keeping safety front and center. And so a couple of things just to reiterate here from a support perspective, just to note, impacted families have already received communications outlining the proposed changes and how you can learn more. That's probably one of the reasons you are with us this evening. And so those letters have gone out. as well as a number of calls. There is key information that has already been posted to myips.org. And then if you click on students and families and on transportation, you will find not only these slide decks, but a number of FAQs and different information items that can help walk through some of these potential changes. And then of course, we are offering these town halls. We executed a town hall on Monday, have one tonight, and we'll have another one tomorrow that is more focused on Indigo. And then we will continue to develop additional supports for impacted students in school. So we've said this a number of times, and I know Ashley mentioned it again, but just to ensure that you are putting your questions and putting your thoughts and concerns into the feedback form that you can find on myips.org. We will continuously review those, and that helps us continue to plan for those additional supports. And then one additional kind of mention here around safety. So we are in constant coordination with the Department of Public Works, and Superintendent Johnson might talk a little bit more about that as we get into some Q&A, because that has been something that has been lifted up a number of times. And then also the walk zone review and placement of additional support along specific zones. So our team is in constant review of the walk zones. And again, we've received a number of questions about that, and I'll get into that a little bit here in the Q&A with how our team identifies those walk zones, and then some additional supports that we will offer along those zones as well. And so just want to note that as kind of a preemptive to some of the Q&A here. To take a step back, just some key takeaways, and I believe Superintendent Johnson kind of mentioned this off the top, but we do have a commitment to ensuring the financial sustainability of our organization, which is why we have recommended initiatives, a number of those in transportation for the 21-20 school year to help address that deficit. And while determining those cost reduction strategies, we want to make sure we're prioritizing initiatives that do not impact the classroom. Now, of course, that does not make these decisions easy, which is why it is so important to have these conversations, so important for all of us to lift up concerns and make sure we are working through questions so that we can ensure quality implementation. But do note that we want to make sure we are prioritizing things that do not impact the classroom. And so now I'll start some Q&A. And so as a reminder, I've said it a few times here, we've had a feedback form, a walk zone feedback form that has been up on the website for a couple of weeks now, and we received a number of good questions there. And so I'm going to start with asking some of those trending questions. Please continue to put questions in the Q&A that you will find on the Zoom feature, because I'll start pulling some trending questions from those as well. And then also we received a number of good questions in our joint Indigo and Walk Zone Town Hall that we had on Monday evening. And so, and we'll pull some questions from that as well. And so we will start with Zach. I'll throw this one to you, and then of course Superintendent Johnson and Ashley, if you all have additional information, feel free to chime in. But Zach, what if I have an issue with the safety of the walk zone route area?
Andrew, that's a great question. So we've received a number of questions and concerns about safety with respect to walk zone implementation. And obviously this is always a concern, both as an IPS parent and as someone who's managing the process and supporting our transportation team in this. And so for those parents and families who have specific concerns with respect to either the status of their student or specific to their neighborhood and the walk boundary within their schools, first and foremost, they should reach out to and communicate this to their FACE liaison and their school so that their team is aware of the concern and they can flag it to our transportation team. There's also a dedicated IPS transportation email account that's listed on the website on the transportation page, or it's just ipstransportation@myips.org. And so questions, concern, that's a good resource and contact to flag any questions or concerns with respect to walk zones or any other transportation related questions. And finally, if there are specific issues related to a particular student or a particular area, you can always submit a walk zone exemption request process if you would like the transportation team to review that particular case and instance and determine if there's either a support or mitigation that we can do to identify that issue, or if in that particular case a hazard bus would be justified in under the circumstances.
Great, thanks, Zach. And so I mentioned on a previous slide just some additional supports that we are thinking through in terms of walk zones. And so, will every school, per the walk zone policy, have crossing guards?
So the transportation team evaluates every school walk boundary and then the designated hazard boundaries within that. And so the determination of the location and number of crossing guards, we're in the process right now of reviewing and finalizing those assignments and deployments for the 21-22 school year. And so we will provide and communicate that information out prior to the end of this current school year so that families are aware of locations of that. And so the process by which the team evaluates that is really based on the individual circumstances of that particular school and the number of students at a particular location. And so generally a crossing guard is deployed where we've identified a hazard boundary that is either a high traffic street or a street that may not have a sufficient supporting pedestrian supports to facilitate a safe route to school there, and that serves a high number of students. So in those circumstances, where appropriate, we deploy and assign a crossing guard to support that walk zone. So like I said, our team is continuing to finalize those decisions and deployments for next year, and we will communicate that out, and that will be posted to our website prior to the end of the school year for the 21-22 school year.
Great, thanks, Zach. And a question just received kind of along those same lines. When will we know where the crossing guards will be located? I know we have a map online that is available now, but I think that just shows this current school year. And so when can we start to see where the crossing guards for next year will be located?
Right, so we'll finalize those, and those should be both communicated to schools and then posted to our transportation website by school, the location and intersection of those crossing guards. We will have that information by the end of May, before the end of the school year, so that parents can have that information prior to the end of the school year and begin to plan and think about the start of the next school year.
Great, thanks, Zach. And I think I'll throw this one to Superintendent Johnson, just to go a little bit deeper with is the district working with the City of Indianapolis and the Department of Public Works on the sidewalks, snow removal, streetlights, et cetera?
We are. So we're in regular conversation with the team over at DPW, doing some work to look at, our walk zones and if there are any barriers for students to walk to school and how they need to get there, along with even our bus stops, and if there are any barriers, overgrown bushes, those kinds of things that we can bring to their attention and then collaborate on a solution. So those conversations are certainly underway, and they are a helpful partner. And where they can, accommodate those requests, then so far we've found them willing to do so. But those conversations are ongoing.
Great, and kind of staying on the sidewalk theme, what if I live? I think this is for you or Zach. What if I live in a neighborhood that doesn't have sidewalks? How does that factor in?
Yeah, so Zach, I know we'll talk a little bit about this because he's been studying this more carefully. And I do want to name from a city point of view, they are certainly willing to be helpful partners. That said, at a request like, hey, can we put a sidewalk in at this particular stretch of a road isn't an insignificant request, and is a pretty big request. So given that, then we also have to navigate those challenges as we're making decisions about kids' paths to get to school. So Zach, I know you've done some calculations around this, so I'll let you speak in more detail.
Right, no, that's right. We've again had lots of conversations with the city, and we know that there are big differences in terms of the pedestrian supports and streetscape infrastructure across our city and in different neighborhoods and in and around many of our schools. And so obviously that's a factor that we look at and consider. The reality is that with respect to sidewalks, we know that it's about 30% of our streets have supporting sidewalks, and so there are lots of gaps and and areas in the city where don't have adequate sidewalks. And unfortunately, the budget for that is somewhat limited, and even where there are resources deployed for that, it's a long time to kind of get in line in terms of having that build out. So what we do as a transportation team is we evaluate both the walk distance for a student and then kind of an estimated walk route for that student to determine, is there a safe route to school based on the pedestrian infrastructure in and around that neighborhood. And so sidewalks would be a factor in that consideration, but not in every case would a sidewalk at a particular street be necessary if there is an alternative route available to that student that provides a safe route to school, provided and supports pedestrian traffic there. Particularly with DPW, a lot of our conversations are specifically uplifting and identifying challenges and barriers that are related to lighting, streetscape. If there are intersections that have obstructed views for drivers, we certainly want to flag that to our city partners for appropriate mitigation. We just recently this week are working with the DPW to make sure that we have appropriate school signage up in and around our school so that we can make sure that drivers are being alert and aware of the presence of students in those neighborhoods. And so we'll continue to work with the city as we lead and plan for next fall, and then into the fall as issues come up. Certainly want to be good partners with our city, with our partners in the city, to make sure that we're identifying and thinking about how we can build out these strategies, because ultimately it's not just about the walk to school. These are the neighborhoods and the places where our students live and play as well. And so it's not just about their safety in their walk to school. It's about making sure that they're safe on the weekends and in the summers as they live and navigate the areas in and around their homes and schools.
Great, Zach. And I'll kind of follow up. This is a question that just came through. And as you were talking a little bit about calculating the distance of the walk zone. So this is a specific example, but has trended with a few questions. So I mapped my son's walk zone from our home, and it's 1.3 miles. Driving distance says 0.7 miles. How are you calculating the distance?
Right. So we've had that question come up with families who might put it into an online kind of trip calculator or Google Maps or something like that. And so generally the walk distances are determined based on our transportation system. So we use a system called Edulog that does both our routing and calculates the walk distance for our walkers. And so there can be some minor differences that matter on the margins when calculating those walk distance for students, based on sort of how the distance is calculated from the school. And so it may vary from what a student calculates based on a website or online. So we base that off of the Edulog system. I'll also note that it also takes into consideration hazard boundaries. So within each of those walk boundaries, the team evaluates the existing infrastructure. And so obviously something like an interstate or a freeway, we wouldn't have a student expected to walk and traverse interstate or a freeway or a really high traffic, high speed road or intersection. And so within each of the walk boundaries, there are certain sections that are designated as hazard boundaries. And so if a student lives within that hazard boundary, even though they're in the broader walk boundary, that student will continue to receive a yellow bus hazard assignment unless that hazard could be mitigated in some way.
Great, thanks, Zach. And so you mentioned this verbally as part of the presentation, but if my child has an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, or a 504, are they required to walk?
Great question. And we've had that question and concern come up through some of our transportation feedback. And so the decision is whether or not their transportation services is it a part of that IEP or 504 plan. So it's not just that the student necessarily has an IEP or a 504 plan. It's does that 504 plan IEP come with a transportation attachment as a part of that plan. And so for those students for whom transportation is a necessary and important part of that IEP plan, those students will continue to receive that yellow bus assignment and would not be impacted.
Great. I'm going to transition back to safety here. A few questions that are trending relative to safety, I think for both you, Zach, and Superintendent Johnson. Will IPS, police, and/or IMPD have a presence at the walk zones and Indigo bus stops?
So Chief Gwynn has been, our IPS PD Chief of Police has been plugged in with Zach and the team and looking at walk zones and high volume bus stops so that we can be strategic about deploying some additional patrolling and monitoring during the times, particularly arrival and dismissal of school. So do expect to see that, particularly as we get started at the start of the school year.
Great. And so how do we intend to ensure the safety of students in the months where the students would have to leave for school during a time of pre-dawn or dawn? So when it's dark out, and those who live in high crime areas with poorly lit, high traffic streets.
So to the extent possible, obviously we'll work between those additional monitorings that we have going on, the conversations with DPW, to the extent possible that we can mitigate, we will. But ultimately, it's going to be really important that family members, parents are making a plan to be sure that they are either accompanying their young person or partnering with a neighbor or someone who can accompany their young person to get to school each day. So that will be something that we will have to partner with families to make sure that that's happening.
I think that's exactly right. And obviously with respect to, we know in the winter time, it's dark sometimes in the morning and there's rain, and that's obviously something we want to think about and try to help support families who are navigating that. But it's an issue for students waiting on yellow bus stops as well, in terms of walking to their bus stop and waiting on the bus stop. And so that's, it's sort of a function of living in Indianapolis, living in the north, and trying to navigate that. And so what we really want to be thoughtful about is how we can engage community partners, the school, and think about, we know students are safer when they're together. And so as Ashley indicated, with respect to programs like the walking school bus programs and helping to make connections between families within those walk zones so that they can think about ways that they can connect and cooperate and collaborate to make sure that we're doing this as a community and not letting students sort of navigate this on their own.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And so it's kind of staying on this theme. Will schools have the opportunity to share more specific information about areas of need for their particular neighborhoods?
I'd say absolutely. Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about the work happening particular to schools?
Yes, so I was absolutely in agreement with you all's last answer to that previous question as well, because the more families can share feedback with their school leadership team, the more support they can receive from the school as they're planning their students' route. So for the upcoming school year, we're going to be very intentional about helping families get paired up and matched with other families that live in the same area. And that way they can kind of be on the lookout for who's going to be at their nearby walking school bus stop. What are the carpool options available to them? Being aware of all of the opportunities to collaborate with other families in the area, but also with those community partners, as Zach was mentioning a moment ago. We've been talking to the neighborhood community centers and really trying to get an understanding of how they can also come alongside and support families. We know they are already providing service to many of our parents by way of before and after care programs. So even thinking about creative ways that we can kind of build on those programs to give families options that will, make things as convenient and safe as possible. So I would say if you are really concerned about, obviously, the safety of your students' route, please do take the time to report that so that we can go take a look at the area, take the necessary steps to evaluate that route, but then also pair and match you up with the supports that we do have available.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Ashley. How is, speaking of supports, how is the district accommodating for ESL students as we make this transition?
So obviously we want to make sure, first of all, that there's accessibility to the information. And so this evening, making sure our primary 2 languages that we know are spoken across the district are English and Spanish. Those aren't the only 2. So where necessary, if we need those additional translation supports for families, for example, if they've received a letter in the mail about this transition, making sure those are available. And our schools are lifting up where there are families who may be having challenges. That's why Ashley and her team have our FACE liaisons making those follow-up calls to individual families so we can see where those concerns exist and be sure that access to information, understanding that information is clear for all of our families.
Great, thank you. And I'm looking at seeing if there are any additional trending questions coming in. I'll just, as a reminder, if questions do come up as you are taking in this information and thinking through this over the next couple of days or weeks, please visit the My IPS website and utilize that feedback form as we continue to plan. I will turn it over to Superintendent Johnson to provide us some closing words for the evening. I'll continue to monitor questions here to see if there's any additional trending questions we need to lift up.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Again, just want to share my appreciation for all of you who've joined this evening to learn more. This is the beginning of a conversation, and so hopefully we've been able to share some of the different ways that we intend to continue to communicate and then continue to provide support as families are making this transition. But we appreciate the engagement to what Ashley and Zach and Andrew have all shared. There are a number of ways to lift up additional questions through our feedback form online. You can go to myips.org to find that through your school, specifically your FACE liaison or your principal or assistant principal. Please be sure to continue to highlight those questions because again, this is the beginning of communicating and providing those supports. And so we want this to be an ongoing conversation so that all of our students feel supported and ready to go once our school year starts back in a few months. So thanks for your time this evening and for being with us, and have a good evening.